All right, so I am super excited for this video because we're gonna be covering one of the most lucrative niches out there. And in this video, I'm gonna be sharing with you 20 of the best vintage clothing items to be on the lookout for. These are items that are selling for a lot of money. We're gonna jump right in here. So number one are video game t-shirts. There's a ton of the different ones that are selling for a lot. Here's an example of one from Halo 3 that sold for $69. And another one from Mario Kart that sold for $120. And a Super Mario Brothers 3 that sold for $150. And a kids size Pokemon t-shirt that sold for almost $100. But there are a ton of different video game t-shirts that are selling for a ton. This just barely scratches the surface. Next up, Carheart Items. These can sell for a ton of money, especially with the older items. I've got one to be able to show you that is from the 40s or 50s, and especially if you come across Union tags. This is an example of a blanket lined jacket that sold for $450. These used to be selling for $100 or $200, but the price has really gone up the past few years. Here's an example of what that tag looks like on the inside. And if you come across these Aztec jackets from Carhartt, they will have Aztec embroidery across the front chest. There is a huge demand for these items. This is an example of one that had 13 bids on it and went for $270. And don't overlook items that are in flawed condition. This is a pair of pants that is covered in paint that went for almost $100. And there are tons of these selling in distressed condition with holes and tears and stains and paint for that $100 mark and even over that. There's a closer look at the paint as well as a hole in the knee. This is a really rare jacket that happens to have that Aztec design on it, and it went for almost $2,500. And here is that Union tag I was talking about, United Garment Workers of America. You'll find this on the back side of those Carhartt tags. And this is an example of an older item from the 40s or 50s that is stained, and it has a very unique logo on it. This is the logo that you'll see here. It has a red heart on it. That means it is from that era, from the 1940s and 1950s. And this pair of jeans went for $630. The next category of items to be on the lookout for are hats. And this is an example of a Resell cowboy hat. This one sold for $170. And here is what the tag looks like on the inside. In addition to cowboy hats, you'll also want to be on the lookout for baseball hats. This is a hat from True Religion. This one sold for almost $110. And look for any hats with big corporate names. This is an example of a hat from Ford that sold for almost $100. And these Nike featherweight snapback hats are selling for a ton of money, between that $50 to $100 range. And this is an example of one that sold for $85. These can make really great flips because a lot of times you can pick these up very cheaply, like 50 cents a dollar at a yard sale, or if you're shopping by weight at somewhere like a Goodwill outlet. And this is a vintage polo Ralph Lauren. Now there are a ton of these selling for right around that $100 mark. This hat happened to sell for $94. Real quick, I hope you're enjoying this video. You might be wondering who I am. My name is LeeMeier. I'm a stay-at-home mom of 4, and I've made well over $100,000 net profit flipping used clothes and other items on sites like eBay, Poshmark, and Mercari. And now I'm on a mission to help as many resellers as I can be able to hit that $100,000 mark for themselves. And to help you out, I've got a ton of free goodies for you. You're gonna find them down here in the description below this video. You're gonna find things like my best brands list, my list of keywords. You're gonna even find a link to sign up for my free $100,000 reseller challenge. This is where I'm showing you exactly how to hit $100,000 for yourself this year. You're also going to discover the very best things to be selling right now in today's market, as well as in the years to come. Next category is mohair sweaters. And this is a really good category of items to go ahead and use the keyword Kurt Cobain from Nirvana. the father of grunge. This is an example of a sweater that sold for $300 using that keyword. And this is a sweater from Jansen that sold for $155. Here is what that Jansen tag looks like. It is a tag to know, a tag to be on the lookout for. And this is a sweater from Towncraft. This is a JCPenney's line. This one sold for $199. And if you're wondering, here is what that Towncraft tag looks like. Next category of items is Filson. It doesn't matter what type of item that you come across from this brand. This has a huge resale value for both their current items as well as their vintage items. And one of the most popular items are their Mackinac jackets. This is an example of one here that sold for $400 with that buffalo plaid. And this is an example of a vintage Filson tag for you. I want you to note that Woolmark logo indicating 100% wool. This also gives you an idea of what year that item is from. That's outside the scope of this video, but I do have another video that covers dating vintage items. If that is something you would be interested in, I am going to link to that up here. And like I mentioned, don't just stick with those Mackinac jackets. Things like pants can sell for $200. This is a pair of vintage pants that went for $210. And their bags are gold. If you come across any bags, these can sell for into the hundreds, even thousands of dollars. This is an example of one here that sold for almost $1,100. And their hats are pretty common to come across. They make all different styles of hats, including baseball hats, as well as packable hats like this one here that sold for $70. And here's an example of a baseball hat that had 9 bids on it and went for $153. Do not sleep on this brand. Next category is vintage dresses from the brand Gunny Sachs. These can make a really quick flip, and some of these are selling for into the hundreds as well as even thousands of dollars. They have a very boho prairie vibe. They're straight out of the 70s, and this is a dress that sold for $795. This is another example of a dress that went for $550 and it had 12 bids on it. And if you come across any of their dresses that are hooded, these are big money. There's multiple of these that are selling for over that $1,000 mark. This is an example of one here that went for almost $1,400 with 1 bid. And here's that Gunny Sachs tag if you were wondering. The next category to be on the lookout for when it comes to vintage is specifically items from the Y2K era, meaning right around the turn of the millennium, approximately 1995 to 2005. With these types of items, it's less about the brand and more about the look of the items. This is an example of a dress with an asymmetrical hem that sold for about $20 from a brand that is called City Triangles. But again, it's less about the brand, more about the style with these items. And anything wide leg from this era. There are a ton of these sweatpants from Lucky Brand selling. This pair sold for $80. And this era is a really good era to pair with those video games that we talked about earlier. This is an example of a Dragon Ball Z button-up shirt that sold for $115. And don't overlook just even basic items. This is an Abercrombie & Fitch baby doll tank that sold for $67. And this is a pair of jeans from the mall brand, Anchor Blue, that sold for almost $62. And of course, don't forget about the brand Jinko when it comes to these Y2K items. This is another type of item that is selling for into the hundreds and even thousands of dollars depending on the style. This is an example of a pair that went for $1,100. And there is an example of a Jinko tag for you. Now, how well these Y2K vintage items sell, a lot does depend on how accurately you can describe the look, the aesthetic of the item. Things like whimsy goth, you saw that in that first dress that we looked at. You have to know those different terms in order to get them in front of the right buyers. And I do have a poster that I'm going to quickly mention that covers 80 different keywords for items both to be on the lookout for, as well as to help you better describe your items and get more traffic and more sales. I'm going to link to that over here. Next category are band tees. There's so many different bands, and their t-shirts are selling for a ton of money, whether they're classic bands, hard rock, metal, hip hop. If it's any sort of band, even if it's a smaller name brand, look up those comps, you might be surprised. This is an example of a Metallica t-shirt from the brand Jerseys that sold for $200. But again, it's less about the brand, more about who is on that shirt. This is from the hip hop group Outkast. This one sold for almost $150. And this one is a Beastie Boys t-shirt from the brand Fruit of the Loom. And this one sold for $180. And Nirvana, Kurt Cobain that I mentioned earlier, those t-shirts can sell for a ton. This is an example of a t-shirt that sold for $175. And Grateful Dead can be a surefire item to pick up. This is an example of a t-shirt with tie-dye from the brand Hanes that sold for $375. And this is another Grateful Dead t-shirt from the brand Liquid Blue that sold for $299. And this is what the tag looks like here from Liquid Blue. The next category of items to be on the lookout for when it comes to vintage clothes is vintage boots. Now, you've probably already heard of Red Wing. I want to highlight a line from Red Wing that is called Sky Trooper. These are selling for close to the $1,000 mark. If you come across these, do not sleep on them. This is an example of a pair that sold for $900. And there is what that Sky Trooper tag looks like. Another vintage boot to be on the lookout for is from the brand Fry, and specifically their campus boot. This is a boot for women that is straight out of the 70s. And these are selling for several $100s, a lot of them for over that $500 mark. This is an example of a pair that went for $697. And here is what the inside will look like of those boots. Dan Post is another vintage boot brand that can sell for hundreds of dollars. This is a pair that went for almost $500. And it's not even in the best condition. It actually has a hole in the bottom of the boot. And here is what that marking will look like on the inside. A lot of times these are really worn off. So it's good to be able to spot them even when they look like that. And don't overlook lower value brands like Sears. This is a pair of boots from Sears that went for $460. And there's that tag for you. And this one is a very common vintage brand that you'll come across that is called Westco. This is another one that can sell for into the hundreds. This pair sold for $425. And that stamp on the inside of the boot can be a little bit hard to read, but that is what it looks like. Next category is vintage Pendleton. These can sell for hundreds of dollars depending on the style. And the style that they are best known for that is selling the best are those Aztec or Southwestern prints. This is a women's blanket jacket that sold for $675. And this is a men's jacket that sold for $488. Here is an example of their high-grade Western wear label. This is a vintage label that you'll only come across in their older items. This is a Cowichan knit sweater from Pendleton that sold for $330. And this one has that iconic blue and gold tag. And again, note that Woolmark logo on this item. Another surprising item that can sell for into the hundreds when it comes to Pendleton are their board shirts. If you come across one that has a loop, I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. This means it's from the 1960s and people are paying big money for these. We're talking an easy $200 to $400 for these items. There's a quick look at the tag on the inside, but what you're really looking for is that loop here at the collar. Newer board shirts are selling for right around the $100 mark, but if you come across these items that have that loop at the collar, those are those older items that are selling for that $200 to $400 price point that I mentioned. Next category of items are any clothing items that have a cigarette brand on them. Now, I do not promote smoking. I'm going to go on record for saying that. But these items can sell for a ton. This is an example of a t-shirt from the brand Camel that sold for $166. And this is a Marlboro snake shirt. There are a ton of these selling for right around this $240 price point. And the iconic Marlboro Man. This t-shirt from the 90s sold for $113. And this is a t-shirt from Newport's Cigarettes. It says "Alive with Pleasure." This one sold for $150. And those are t-shirts, but if you come across higher dollar items like jackets, they can sell for even more money. This is a jacket from Marlboro that sold for $415. Next category are chore coats. Now I know that we've already talked about Carheart, but there are so many other brands to be on the lookout for. This item is from a brand that is called Headlight, and this one sold for $2,600 with 19 bids on it. Here is an example of what their logo looks like on the exterior of the item. And this is a chore coat from Sears, approximately from the 1950s, that sold for $595. And any of these items that you come across that are salvage denim, I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. It doesn't matter the brand. These can sell for hundreds. And this is an example of one here that went for $380. And here is what that salvage denim looks like. This just means that it has a finished edge. And this is something that you'll see on higher end denim as well as vintage denim. And if you come across this, buyers are paying extra money for salvage denim. A couple more quick examples for you from Chore Coats. This is a jacket from LL Bean that sold for almost $200. And then this is one from Eddie Bauer that sold for $174. And this one did sell for a little bit more money because it does have goose down lining. So pro tip there, if you come across any goose down, that can be a very profitable feature that buyers are shopping for and they're willing to pay a premium markup. Next category are velour tracksuits. There's currently a huge surge for these types of items. If you come across sets, you can get extra money for them, but don't be afraid to sell the jacket or the pants individually if you happen to come across not a complete set. This is a velour Nike tracksuit from the 1980s that sold for $500. And this is a velour tracksuit from Juicy Couture that sold for $250. And any streetwear brands that you come across. This is one from South Pole, and that velour set sold for $161. And if you're enjoying this video and you want to dive even deeper into vintage items and you'll want to check out my vintage clothing guide, I'm going to link to it over here for you. Next category is vintage Disney items. Nostalgia is surging and buyers are paying a ton of money for some of these items, one of which is Fantasia. I don't know what the reason is, but these are going for a ton. This is an example of a t-shirt that sold for $1,000. And of course, anything more classic like Mickey or Minnie or Donald Duck. This is an example of a jacket with Donald Duck on the back there. That one sold for $900, and here is what that tag looks like. And any items from movies that came out in the 80s or 90s, there is a huge surge in demand for these types of items. And if you come across any of these vintage Lady and the Tramp circle skirts, these are selling for over the $500 mark. This is an example of one here that sold for almost $700. This is an example of a t-shirt from 101 Dalmatians that sold for almost $450. It is from the Disney store and made in the USA. And then I could not resist showing Winnie the Pooh panties. This is a set of 4 that sold for $280. And of course, anything that is no longer in existence, those items are gonna sell for even more money. This is a Splash Mountain t-shirt that sold for $200. Next category of items are suspenders. This is a category of items that a lot of resellers pass over or they maybe don't even know about. These can be an easy $50 to $100 flip. This is an example of Dice suspenders from the brand Trafalgar that sold for $72. There's a close-up there for you. These can be very intricately designed, and there's a picture of the tag. Albert Thurston is another brand to be on the lookout for when it comes to suspenders. And these can make, again, a really solid $50 to $100 flip. This is one that has dogs on it, and it sold for $75. Note that British flag. That's how you will identify this brand, Albert Thurston. And one more example of suspenders for you. This is a pair from the Tool brand Snap-on. That one sold for $99. Next category are Y2K shoes. This is one of the most exciting categories to me because you don't have to have a big name brand in order to get a lot of money for some of these different styles. This one is a brand to be on the lookout for called London Underground. And if you come across these are an easy $150 to $200 flip. This pair went for $180. With these Y2K styles, a lot of them are very chunky. They do have larger platforms. That's what you're going to look for when it comes to these styles. This is a pair of chunky soled boots from Skechers. It's a line that is called Jammers. There are a ton of these selling for right around the $100 price point, $50 to $100 depending on the condition, and this one went for $98. But again, there are a ton of these selling. That's what that marking looks like. This is one of those more lower end brands that I was talking about. This is a pair of shoes from the brand LEI. This is a pair of clogs with lug soles. This one went for $80. And this is another pair of clogs, patchwork design, that comes from Lower East Side, which was from the mall brand Payless Shoe Source. And these sold for $100. Now I do have a video I'm gonna link to up here where I go through other brands from Payless Shoe Source that are selling for a ton of money. And these are just so shocking to me because in the store you could pick these up for $10 or $20 and now they are selling for a ton more just because that style is in demand. There is that marking from Lower East Side. And then this is a pair of sandals from Faded Glory, i.e. Walmart, that sold for $100. This isn't just an outlier. There are tons of these styles of sandals selling from Walmart, Target, other lower end brands that are selling for that $100 to $150 mark just because of the look of these items. And there's a little peek at that Faded Glory tag if you haven't seen that before. Next category are vintage snowsuits. Now, one of the brands to be on the lookout for is called Nils. This sold for $175, and there's that Nils tag for you. Also note that Gore-Tex label. This is something that buyers are paying extra money for, and if you see Gore-Tex marking on any items, chances are that will be a really good flip for you. And then this is a vintage women's ski suit that sold for $130. This is from a brand called Skia or Skea, but really it's about the look of these items. This is another vintage snowsuit from the 1980s that sold for $120. This is from a brand that is called Slalom. This category of items is so popular, there's actually current brands that are making these retro looks. An example of one of these brands is called Tipsy Elves, and these are easily selling for the $100 to $200 mark. And if they're more rare designs, will go for even more, like this one that went for $340. So we have almost made it through the countdown, but I do want to quickly invite you to check out the Empowered Reseller membership program. This is where I'm able to connect with members. It's where I'm able to give you the accountability that you need. And I do monthly trainings exclusively with my members. Things like sourcing masterclasses to help you bump up your average sale price, be more profitable, and never pass by valuable items again. The next category are Sherpa or shearling lined jackets. These have been popular for quite some time and it's not going away anytime soon. This is an example of a jacket from Wranglers that sold for $60. This is another one from Wranglers that sold for $99. And this is another one that sold for $99 from the brand Lee. And this is a shearling jacket from Polo Ralph Lauren that sold for $325. Next category are vintage undergarments. For whatever reason, people are paying a ton for these. I don't know if they have their favorite style and then they're no longer made and then they go online and are looking for them. But this is an example from one from Victoria's Secret called Second Skin, and there are a ton of these selling. This is a bra that sold for $145, and that is in used condition. This is an example of another used bra. This is from a brand called Olga. This one sold for $75. And this is one from a brand called La Perla that sold for $88. And again, if you're paying by weight, if you're shopping at somewhere like a Goodwill outlet, you can pick these up for under $1, maybe even 50 cents. This is another example from that Second Skin line from Victoria's Secret. This is a pair of panties that sold for $159, of course in new condition. Victoria's Secret Angels line is another one to be on the lookout for. This pair went for $130. And you might think that this is just an outlier, but there are tons and tons of these vintage panties selling. Look it up. Next category are licensed character items for kids and babies. This is a romper with Pluto on it that sold for $250. There is that baby Mickey tag there for you. And this is another 101 Dalmatian items. This is another romper. This one sold for $182 with 27 bids on it. And this is a little girl's dress with Clifford, the big red dog. This one had a ton of bids, 29 bids, and it went for $360. Toy Story is another big hitter in this category, and this is a two-piece set that had 17 bids on it and went for $305. The movie Cars is another big hitter. This is a pair of short dolls. It had 74 bids on it and went for $280, and there were several of these selling for right around that same price point. And don't pass over licensed items when it comes to baby and kids shoes. This is a pair of shoes with Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, and they sold for $125 after 4 bids. And back to those overalls, this is a pair of girls' overalls with Abby from Sesame Street that sold for $300. Now, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Let me know what your best vintage flip is and what category you're most excited to get started with. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video soon.